everybody, Calamity here, and sorry for the blurry picture, but this is going to be the list of characters that you can give a free constellation to, starting with the next update on Tuesday. That'll be coming out real soon. A couple of things that you should know about this system, first of all, is that yes, it is only going to be limited to these characters that you see behind me, and you can only give them one constellation each. No getting, a character all the way up to C4. You also have to have the character initially. This is not like, oh, let me use this to pick up 4 characters I've never pulled before. Like, for example, I want to get a Klee or a Xiao or whatever and get like a free character. No, you have to have the character first, then you can decide who to give your free one constellation to. So you have 4 different options here, and instead of telling you, pick this character and this character and this character, I'm just gonna go over almost every single one. The only ones I'm gonna skip are standard characters, so that's those characters you see at the bottom, and the 2 at the top, Dia and Tainari. But that includes Kaching, Mona, Chi-Chi, Diluc, and Jean. We will be skipping them because they're standard banner characters. So I do not recommend you use your free constellation on them, just because you never know, right? You could always pull them in the standard banner. You could always lose a 50-50 to them. I'm not trying to curse your pulls or nothing. I'm just saying that could happen in the future at some point. So you can always get constellations for them. Now, the only very niche scenario, I would say maybe you could use a constellation on them if you really, really want to, is if they're at C5 and you just want to get them at C6, so that you can get the brand new item that will increase the level cap of the character of your choice. So in case you didn't know about that either, once you have a limited 5-star character, or a standard or a limited 5-star character at C6, the next time you pull them again, you will get an item that increases the level cap of any character of your choice. But remember, you need 2 of them, because the first time you use it on a character, their level cap will increase to 95. Then the second time it's to 100. So keep that in mind. That's the only niche scenario where I would use the free constellation on a standard character, but even then, I would still probably go for limited characters. And let's get the boring answer out of the way again. The characters that you should pick are the ones you enjoy the most, the ones that you play the most, the ones that you have fun with the most, or maybe, someday you want to see this character, even if it's going to take you a long time. Those are the characters you should focus on. You don't really need a video to tell you that, but we're just going to go over all of the other limited characters and just kind of discuss how useful their C1, and we'll dive into their other constellations. Maybe some of you do have them at C1 already and you're wondering if that C2 is more useful, and eventually, maybe you're building up to that C6. So let's go ahead and start with Baizhu, and we'll just go, basically I'm going to use this list and just go through all the characters. So the first character on the list is Baizhu, and let's go ahead and take a look at his C1. I'm not going to really go over the character's kits and basic stuff. I'm assuming you already know that because you have the character. So we're just going to strictly talk about the constellations. But let's go ahead and dive in. So C1 is Universal Diagnosis, gains an additional charge. This is elemental skill. This is how he heals. And this is going to be good because it means, if you can use your skill twice, you can do it for more energy, so you get your burst back faster. So it's okay, but what does it lead up to? There's other constellation, obviously, right? Eventually, remember, you only get 4 constellations per year. That's how it's currently designed. So maybe in the future, if you want to go for C2, in the following year, what could you get? What's the effect you're going to be getting? And it's when your active character hits a nearby opponent with their attacks, Baizhu will unleash a Gossamer Sprite Splice. The Gossamer Sprite Splice will initiate 1 attack before returning, dealing 250% of Baiju's attack as dendro damage, and healing for 20% of Universal Diagnosis Sprite's normal healing. Damage dealt this way is considered elemental skill damage, and this effect can be triggered once every 5 seconds. Now this one is a lot more interesting because you technically won't have to switch to Baizhu as often to do his elemental skill. This will make your rotations a bit faster with Baizhu on the team because you won't have to switch to him, and you won't have to again, maybe just switch to him to do the burst for the shield, but that's about it. You won't have to do skill because you'll be He'll be also applying Dendro more often, which is one of his weaknesses, right? Is the Dendro application compared to other characters. So this right here is a really good one, but it's the C2. C1, I would say, is just like, oh, that's alright, you know, it's nice. Gives him a little bit more Dendro application, more energy, more heals. But what it's leading up to, the C2, I think is a lot more useful for you. So overall, I would say Baizhu is a pretty good option if you're looking to get an upgrade for your Dendro healer / shielder. Alright, we're going to skip over Dia's constellations and go straight over to Wanderer. So if you were to C1 your Wanderer, what do you get? When in the win favored state, the attack speed of the Wanderer's Kugo Fushodan and Kugo To... I don't know how to say these words, I'm sorry. Kugo Tofukai is increased by 10%. Additionally, the wind arrows fired from his passive talent, Gales of the Reverie, will deal an additional 25% of his attack as damage. You must unlock the passive talent first. So more attack speed, which is great. More damage of his passive talent. 25% increase. This is just more damage, obviously. That's how a lot of these DPS characters are going to be. So if you find your Wanderer's damage to be a little bit lacking, C1's a good option. Now, what is that going to lead to with the C2? When in the win favored state, Kyogen, I don't know how to say that, 5 ceremonial plays will see its damage increase by 4% per point of difference between the max amount of Kyugori, oh my goodness, his points basically contrasted with his present capacity when using the skill. Through this method, you can increase his burst damage by 200%. So this one changes his rotation a bit, just a tiny bit, but you want to make sure you use as much of your, remember he has that special stamina bar when you press his skill, right? And then you want to use his burst like right at the end of it, because the bigger your difference is, the bigger damage it will do. So this gives him a huge chunk of burst damage. This is a gigantic upgrade to his damage overall. And definitely worth considering in the future if you decide to go for constellations for Wanderer. So yeah, we're going to mainly just stick with like constellations 1 and 2 for most characters. I think you can understand like C6 is going to be broken for most characters. If they're not that good, I'll point it out. Like some of the standard characters obviously don't have good C6s, but I would say these are pretty good, and what you're building up to is pretty nice. It changes up his gameplay a little bit more while making him do more damage. All right, next up is Nilou. So Nilou C1 is Dance of the Waning Moon, and it will increase your skill, your elemental skill, in 2 different ways. So if you do the Luminous Illusion, that's her normal attacks, right? With like the big blade looking attacks, they will get an increase of 65% damage. And then if you press the elemental skill button constantly, you'll get the little aura. This will increase the duration by 6 seconds. This is not that good if Nilou is not the driver on her Nilou Bloom team. So not everyone has Nilou Bloom's like signature weapon where she becomes like a good driver for it, so you're not always using the aura. Most of the free-to-play owners of Nilou will probably be using the Luminous Illusion. So this constellation's not good unless she's the driver, because having the extra 6-second duration on her skill is nice for constant hydro application, so you can just, you know, pull out the Nahida and keep making those Bloom Dendro cores. However, if we start getting deeper into her constellations, then they get a little bit more spicier, because here, this makes it so her opponent, when they take hydro damage, they will lose 35% hydro res, and then when you trigger bloom, excuse me, they will lose 35% Dendro resistance. This is both. So in total, you're getting a 70% increase in damage because they're losing both hydro and Dendro resistance, and what do you know, bloom damage does both. So it's a gigantic damage increase. This is the juicy one here. This one is okay with if Nilou becomes your Nilou Bloom driver. I don't know why I can't say it, but there you go. Something to consider. This is really, really good. Obviously, once you get to C3, C5, those are a little because you don't really care about the skill levels, right? It's all about the bloom damage, so she wants the HP for it. So yeah, Nilou's constellations, I would say, are pretty solid. Well, once you get to C2, are pretty solid. But consider making her the main driver if you're going to decide to invest in her constellations. Alright, next up is Cyno. And let's go ahead and take a look at his C1. So after using Sacred Right, Wolf Swiftness, Cyno's normal attack speed will be increased by 20% for 10 seconds. If the adjudication effect for his passive talent, Featherfall Judgment, is triggered during the Secret Right, Chasmic Soulfarer, this duration will increase and be refreshed. You need to unlock the passive talent first. So first of all, a 20% attack speed increase is huge for Cyno's DPS overall. Now, if you decide to pair him with some attack speed buffs, this is going to be even crazier, and he'll be doing crazy fast damage, but not a lot of teammates can do that for him, at least in a good team. Now, if we go to his C2, when Cyno's normal attacks hit opponents, his electro damage bonus will increase by 10% for 4 seconds, and he can get 5 stacks of this, so he gets a 50% electro damage bonus. So if you basically just want your Cyno to be hitting harder, and his gameplay doesn't really change much, to be honest, with these constellations, go for it. These are really solid, and they're just going to give him more, bigger numbers and more frequent numbers for sure. Let's take a look at his constellation. So his first one is his Shun Suiken damage is increased by 40% against opponents with 50% HP or less. Remember, that's just your clones, not Ayato himself. And this one's kind of right? It's a little iffy. Like, yeah, sure, it's a nice damage increase, but has to be less than half their HP. This is going to be good for bosses. It's going to make your clear speed feel a lot faster in like Spiral Abyss and Stygian Onslaught and stuff like that, but it's not that great. What you're building up to, though, is it gets a little bit better. This makes his Namisen stack go up to 5 now, and he'll get a huge increase in HP by 50%. Remember, Namisen is basically his HP scaling damage multiplier, so you get a stack of Namisen, he gets an increase based off his HP, his max HP. So this is good damage for finally himself and not just his clones. So this is a nice power spike for him. I will say, though, if you eventually decide to go for his C6, which is going to take a really long time with how the system is currently designed, this is where it starts getting, really, really good, because then he'll summon 2 additional clones, including himself, right? And you're all attacking the same thing. That's where his single target damage, it will absolutely skyrocket. But that's why it's a C6, right? And not a C1 or a C2, but his first couple constellations, I would say C2 is good, solid damage increase for sure, but C1's a little Up to you if you want to give him the free constellations or not. Next up is Yae Miko's constellations. The first one will make it so that each time your burst hits an enemy, or each time it activates, which means you need to sacrifice more totems, you will gain 8 elemental energy for herself. This is incredibly good, assuming you play Yae Miko correctly, right? And you summon all of her totems and then use her burst to consume all of them. You will gain 24 elemental energy if you play this correctly, which you should. This is huge considering Yae Miko has one of the most expensive bursts in the game still, right next to Raiden Shogun. It costs 90. Unlike other characters, right, the most we usually see these days is 80, maybe 70, but she still has 90, and that's been one of her biggest drawbacks for sure. Usually we pair her up with Raiden Shogun to sort of like offset this downside, but it's not always going to be the case. But yeah, this was a huge downside for her, so this gets rid of it, essentially making what's a 90 cost elemental burst go all the way down to 66, which is way more manageable. It doesn't mean you should completely neglect your energy recharge, but it means you don't have to heavily invest in it as much as you probably are at C0, which means you can probably swap a little bit of her artifacts around and maybe go for that, a little bit more crit rate, a little bit more crit damage, attack percentage, etc., etc. However, what you're building up to is even better if you decide to invest in Yae Miko further, and that's going to be her C2, which makes it so her totems start at level 2, and now the max level is 4, and their attack range is increased by 60%. This right here is such a crazy constellation. It's 2 effects in one, and it's a ton more damage and a ton of quality of life because of the range. You don't have to think about oh, like, oh, is it gonna reach or not? Like, it's pretty much gonna reach it. Think of like the Spiral Abyss Arena. You could probably put those totems, you know, like you can't put them like across the whole arena, but as long as they're like somewhat in the proximity of the boss, they'll still hit, and they'll be doing way more damage. So remember when we first talked about Yae Miko in her skill attributes, we noticed that she does have a level 4. And we're like, how do you get that? And it, you know, it turns out it was locked behind a constellation the whole time. So most of the damage we're doing with each totem was only at this 94.8%, and this is only at level 1, mind you. So let's take a look at my Yae Miko, and let's see how much more damage she'll be getting. So mine is at level 10. So you can see here, this is a huge damage increase if you're getting a C2 for Yae Miko. So here at level 3, this is what I'm doing right now. And this is, again, level 10 talent. So each totem, remember we have 3 totems, would be getting a 43-ish% increase in damage per totem. That is ginormous amounts of damage increase for Yae Miko. So C2, definitely worth something to consider building up to if you don't have her, you know, if you don't have any constellations. Even just getting the C1 and reducing that elemental burst cost is going to make her feel much more smoother to play. And she's honestly, for me personally, going to be one of the characters I definitely consider giving a constellation to in the future. All right, next up is Shenhe, and we're going to take a look at her constellation 1. So her skill can be used one more time. This already is a great constellation because it means you can upkeep her buff for longer, and obviously the energy, the extra energy that she's going to generate because she's using her skill twice now is going to mean more consistent burst to uptime. So more consistent burst uptime is always going to be great. It's the debuff, right? It shreds physical and cryo resistance. It's just going to be an overall, this is, even though it's so simple, this is so good. And obviously giving everyone double your buff basically is going to be such an insane damage increase overall. It doesn't matter if you're using Ayaka, you're using Skirk, right? Like Escoffier, they're all going to constantly get this increase of cryo damage more consistently. The only characters that probably won't benefit too much are like if you use her with Ganyu, which you shouldn't be anyways. But yeah, C1, very good if you're invested in your cryo teams. Now let's take a look at C2, which makes it so that her burst lasts even longer, which means enemies are debuffed longer. And if you step inside the field, you get a 50% increased cryo crit damage increase, which is really nice for basically every cryo DPS. So a nice little damage boost and longer debuff time is always welcome here. I do want to point out that C6 Shenhe is definitely something you want to consider in the long term, because this removes the whole trigger quota, which means you can, as long as her skill is active with the icy quills, you can use whoever. Now you can use Ganyu and never have to worry about losing this buff too early because of her charge attacks. You could just pop the skill, remember you have it twice now, and just go ham on whichever cryo character you want. You know, Ricely, Ganyu, Ayaka, they're just gonna eat, or just gonna do so much increased damage, it's insane. But obviously this is C6, so it's going to be a very long time till we can see it. Next up is going to be our favorite GeoDPS. Our favorite male GeoDPS, I should say. His C1 is stay a while and listen up. And after using his royal descent, behold Itto the evil, Arataki Itto gains 2 stacks of superlative super strength. After 1 second, Itto will gain 1 stack every 0.5 seconds for 1.5 seconds. It's a little weirdly worded, but a better way to word this is that you're gonna passively gain super strength stacks just as soon as you use your burst. And this is gonna make it so that you can just do the, you know, the thing where he does his charge attacks at max stacks and do a bunch of damage. And you know, this is overall gonna be a damage increase because you don't have to waste time building up stacks, right? You can get it in a much faster rotation, which is overall gonna be a nice thing for him. What you're building up to with the C2. So C2 is gather round, it's a brawl. After using your burst, each party member whose element is Geo, which should be the majority of them, to be honest, right, will decrease the skill's cooldown by 1.5 seconds and restore 6 energy to Arataki Itto. This can decrease your cooldown by up to 4.5 seconds and restore up to 18 energy in this manner. This is really, really good because again, you're gonna reduce your energy recharge needs, and you're gonna have more burst uptime. So this is like a win-win and an overall damage increase. You're basically gonna be in his Oni form pretty much all the time. You just have to swap off of him, excuse me, to do your your buffs, your debuffs, whatever, and then swap back to him. Burst should be ready, and you won't have to build as much energy recharge for me as well. So you can go ahead and invest in crit rate, crit damage, attack percentage, or excuse me, defense percentage, I should say, etc., etc. And if we take a look at his burst, it costs 70, so getting what should be a guaranteed 18 energy is gonna make this a 52 energy cost burst. That is insanely cheap and very manageable to do, especially when you have so many Geo characters on the team. Like if you give them just one character, one or two characters, right, with a Favonius weapon, this is going to be so easy to build. And the cooldown, we can see that we can make it at, like, I think the max reduction is going to make it like 13.5 seconds or something like that. So look at the duration and look at the cooldown. There's barely any downtime between then, and it's actually going to feel really, really nice to play Arataki Itto once you build up to that Constellation 2. Alright, next is Kokomi. So let's take a look at her C1. So while donning the ceremonial garment created by Nered's Ascension, that's her burst, the final normal attack in her combo will unleash a swimming fish to deal 30% of her max HP as hydro damage. This attack is not considered normal attack damage. I don't know why they they did it like that. I guess because it already has a nice scaling. But this will add a bit of damage at the end of Kokomi's combo, but to be honest, if you're just using Kokomi for bloom stuff, this isn't gonna matter. This is only if you're like trying to do some maybe electro charge stuff and Kokomi's the driver, that she'll get a decent damage increase, but this isn't really that great. This isn't, oh my god, Kokomi's amazing now kind of thing. So C2 is the clouds, like waves rippling. This makes Kokomi heal even more to characters that have less than 50% HP. So it makes her, both her burst and her skill just heal more. And honestly, she's already a fine healer at C0, so I don't really see the usage out of the constellations. Honestly, I don't find either of her first two constellations to be that amazing at all, so I would definitely consider skipping her unless you just really, really like the character. Next up is Yoimiya, and we're gonna take a look at our constellations. First one is the Gate Ryukin, the Aurous Blaze created by the Ryukin Sassafrage. I don't know how to say that word, sorry. Lasts for an additional 4 seconds. Additionally, when an opponent is affected by the Aurous Blaze is defeated, within its duration, Yoimiya's attack is increased by 20% for 20 seconds. This tries to make her burst a little bit more useful, but the problem is that it just isn't good. Like, her burst just isn't good, so getting a buff from it isn't that good. Like, obviously this would be great if it meant her skill gave her more, you know, it had more duration and gave her an attack bonus, but it's the burst. You have to defeat an opponent, and most bosses in this game do not have adds, so you're not getting the benefit of getting a 20% attack damage increase. This is only going to be when you're fighting groups of enemies, which is what Yoimiya is terrible at because she lacks AoE. So this constellation is not that good. However, once you get to C2, that's where you start getting damage increases for where it matters. So every time you score a crit with C2, you gain a 25% pyro damage bonus, which can be triggered even when Yoimiya is not on the field. So this one is good. Unfortunately, it's C2, and it's very easy to hit because she's a rapid hitting character and she'll easily get a crit at some point. So it's hard for me to justify giving Yoimiya a constellation unless, again, you just really like the character. C4 is okay as well because it reduces the cooldown of her skill, and that's basically where all her damage comes from. So reducing it is good, but the way you reduce it, not good, because it's only when you trigger an explosion, which means you have to kill an enemy. So if we want to increase her up time, when it comes to like a boss, you're not going to get value. This is only when facing groups of enemies. Obviously, C3 and C5 are not going to be that great. C6 is also a pretty good one, but this one should be like a C1 or a C4 or something, and then you make a C6 an even stronger brand new effect is what I would want Yoimiya to have, but her constellations just are not that insane, unfortunately. I would get her up to C2, and then I would probably just call it a day. Alright, next up is Ayaka, and with the C1, every time Ayaka does normal or charge attacks that deal cryo damage, which is easy to do, it has a 50% chance of decreasing the cooldown of her skill by 0.3 seconds. This effect can occur every 0.1. This is good because reducing the cooldown means you get to use it more often, more energy, and more damage overall. But the constellation itself is kind of, just okay. I wouldn't say it's the same value. It's when you get to C2 is where Ayaka really starts to take off, because she'll now get 2 smaller, basically mini funnels, right? Her burst is like this big funnel of ice, right? This one adds 2 smaller ones to the side that do 20% of the storm's damage, so it's a 40% increase to her burst, because you get 2, right? Assuming they're all hitting the same boss. So this will increase her single target damage greatly, assuming you can land it. And this is what I would say is a good constellation for Ayaka. This one just helps her get her burst more often, which is good. If you decide to go further and invest in Ayaka, this gets even better, right? Now she's shredding defense of her enemies with her with her burst by 30%. That's insanely good. And remember, depending on who you have on the team, this is gonna make for C4, this is gonna make your other teammates do more damage as well, right? Like if you have a Scoffier, even more damage for a Scoffier. See, her C6 is interesting because it doesn't touch on her burst at all. Instead, it makes it so that her charge attacks do an insane amount of damage now, which is actually really good. This is solid. This means she has more ways of doing damage, and it's outside of her burst. But it is a C6, so I would only recommend this to the very most dedicated Ayaka fans out there. And funny thing I will note about this constellation is that if you pair this up with Shenhe, you're gonna, especially with Shenhe's C6, you are gonna have a great time. Pair this up with her burst going off, right? And then you doing her increased charge attacks. Oh, now she can compete with Skirk, but it's so much investment. All right, next up is Eula. We have Eula's constellations. Let's start with the C1. So Eula's C1 is a situational buff. Let's read what it does. So every time Ice Tide's Vortex Grimheart stacks are consumed, Eula's physical damage is increased by 30% for 6 seconds. Each stack consumed will increase the duration of this effect by 6 seconds up to 18 seconds. It's very easy to get max Grimheart stacks for Eula. So this isn't like, really hard to do or very situational. You're always just going to have this buff. So it's basically just a 30% increase for Eula. On her later rotations, it won't be on the initial one because it's when the Grimheart stacks are consumed. But still, 30% damage is going to be great for Eula. So C2 is going to make your Ice Tide Vortex's hold cooldown match its press cooldown. This is going to be nice, right? Like, especially when you consider the combo that you're going to be doing to get the max stacks on her energy sword or her light sword. So this is you don't have to worry about, do I do the press or I do the hold? You can just do the hold now and not have to worry about the cooldown. C4 makes her burst do more damage against opponents with less than half their HP. And C6 makes it so that your burst starts off with 5 stacks already. And you can basically build the max stacks on your sword even faster. Unfortunately, Eula's constellations are not that great. Like, they're good, don't get me wrong, and then she'll end up doing more damage overall. It's just that, overall, I would say Eula's constellations, I mean, you really gotta love the character if you're willing to invest this hard into her. Again, physical damage being what it is, this will make her somewhat competitive, but it's a lot of work, and it's gonna be a long time till we get all of her constellations. But if you like the character, go for it. I just think her constellations are just kind of until you get to that C4, C6 type stuff. Next up is Hu Tao, and I already know what the C1 does, but basically it makes it so that Your charge attacks do not consume stamina. This is a quality of life change, and this will probably end up being an overall DPS increase because you're not having to do the jump cancel. If you're someone that hates doing the jump cancel, you know, the charge dash cancel is much faster, and you don't have to worry about, you know, your stamina because you're gonna have so much of it left over. So yeah, even if you do the jump cancel and you're comfortable doing it, there are still times where I find myself, you know, really low on stamina or close to being empty, and that's not good if I need to dodge an attack or whatever. So having them not consume stamina is really nice quality of life change, although it's not going to be a big DPS increase. Even then, C2 is not that great because it only increases the blood blossom damage by a decent amount, and it makes it so that your burst also applies the blood blossoms from her skill. You're not really using her burst that often in combat, right? And you shouldn't, because it heals her, and we don't want her to be healed. So, quality of life, if you really hate the jump canceling tech with Hu Tao, and you just want to dash cancel and not have to worry about your stamina management. But this is kind of meh. C3 is nice. This is good if you don't have good crit rate on your Hu Tao, but if your crit rate's at a healthy amount, I guess this is going to be not that great for you, but it does mean you can invest even more into crit damage if you want to. C6 is one get out of jail free card. If you accidentally die with Hu Tao at low HP, she'll come back to life with a bunch of buffs, basically, to make her super strong, but it's not that great for a C6. Honestly, C1 is what I would give to Hu Tao and then call it. That's all I would do. Because the rest, sure, they give her a bit more damage, but none of them give her damage in the way that you want her to get damage other than her C3. Because you want to increase the damage of her charge attacks. Like, if there was something that increased the duration of her charge attacks, that would be great, but it's not really. There's none of that. So her constellations are very underwhelming past C1, in my opinion. Next up is Xiao, which gives him a third charge of his elemental skill. And this is honestly great because it means more energy for him for more consistent burst time, or burst up time, excuse me, which is overall good. So what I would do, well, his rotation would be to use all 3 stacks of his skill, then pop burst, right? And then you're gonna get so much energy particles because of it. It'll give you a nice head start into your next burst, and then you'll have your 3 charges again when he needs his energy back. So nice quality of life change. Not gonna be a huge damage increase though. This is again gonna make your life easier, C2, because he'll get more energy recharge when he's not on the field. So when you're using your off-field, you know, characters, applying your buffs, debuffs, etc., etc., he'll get his burst back faster. C3 is meh. C5 is good. C4, C4 is whatever. This is actually a bad constellation because you can always just heal him, right? If your Xiao falls below 50% HP, you know, give him a shield, give him some health. C6 is gonna change up his attack rotation for sure because of your extra usages of his skill, but unfortunately, it does. I forgot it doesn't just straight up buff his damage on his burst. None of them do except C5. So overall, I would say his constellations just make him easier to play with more burst uptime, but they don't increase his damage. Honestly, his C4 is just straight up terrible. But you know, if you really like the character, that's gonna be the repeating pattern or repeating saying. But definitely consider C1 or C2 for quality of life for your Xiao. Next up is Ganyu's constellations, and we're going to talk about the C1, which makes it so that she gets to decrease cryo resistance by 15% when she does a charge level 2, or the Frost Flake arrow, which is that little AoE that she gets after her initial shot. And she will also regenerate 2 energy for herself, which can occur once per charge level 2 Frostflake arrow, regardless if the arrow itself or the bloom hits the target. Pretty much removes any need for your Ganyu to use any energy recharge in her artifacts, which is a nice, you know, change if you were building her for energy recharge for some reason. But if you're doing Milk Ganyu, that second half is completely useless to you because you don't use her burst at all. But it's basically just a 15% damage increase, right? Because of the cryo resistance being shredded. C2 makes it so she gets an additional usage of her skill. Now on paper, this sounds useless because, you know, you're like, why? You know, the energy particle generation is going to be nice, but again, if in Melt Team, not good. And the skill's kind of like whatever. But what's the point? The point is her C6. If you get over here to her C6, then this becomes a lot more useful than it appears to be. But let's go to her C4 first. And this makes it so that enemies that are in her burst will take increased damage up to 25% the longer they stay in it. The problem is that this is it scales up. And the time it takes for it to scale up, you're not going to get that 25% increased damage for very long. It's a decent constellation, but not something you're going to get consistent value. Again, remember, a lot of enemies can teleport, run around, so you might not even get them to the max, you know, damage increase. So kind of iffy constellation. But the C6 is where Ganyu becomes a burst damage powerhouse, because it makes it so that every time you use her skill, you can basically just fire off a fully charged shot. So a lot of Ganyus, if you've ever watched C6 Ganyu, you know, gameplay, they do skill, or they do charge shot, skill, charge, then immediate charge shot, skill again, charge shot, and that's basically a ton of front-loaded damage. And it kills just about anything in the overworld instantly. That's not a boss, right? Or cryo resistant. So all right, next up is Albedo, and let's talk about his constellations. This makes it so transient blossoms generated by his skill regenerate 1.2 energy for his for himself. I don't know why it's 1.2. That's such a weird number. I don't know, maybe there's like a lore reason for that, but bad. This is bad. Why? Because his burst is meh. Albedo does a lot of his damage with his skill, and you want his skill because he does like additional off-field damage with it. So he's not a character where when you build him, like, oh man, you really need to get that energy recharge. Nah. When you build Albedo, you just want as much defense as possible. But yeah, sure, you know, having the energy is nice if you want to do a bit of burst damage with it, but eh. If we move on to his constellations and see his C2, this is such a wordy constellation for no reason. And because if you take a look at it, it says you pop his skill, you get what's called Fatal Reckoning for 30 seconds, but then they make it sound like there's stacks of it, but it doesn't tell you how to gain the stacks. So I'm guessing you just gain the stacks by just every time you use a skill. You reapply his skill. So you would have to reapply his skill 4 times to get a 30% increase in his burst damage, which again, I don't know why they're so... A lot of his constellations buff the wrong thing. Albedo wants to buff his skill damage because that's where the majority of his damage comes from, but we're only buffing his burst so far, which is okay at best. So this is not really that good. C3 is good though because more skill levels, more skill damage, but it's not that crazy. C4 is useless because it's only for plunging attack damage, and all of our plunging characters in this game, Xiao, Varessa, anybody that used with Cloud Retainer, do not put Albedo in their team, unfortunately. So this is useless. C6. Active party members within the solar isotoma field are protected by a shield created by Crystallize, have their damage increased by 17%. Why is it 17? This is a C6 constellation, and we're like, hey, 17% damage increase. This is so bad. Why is it not 20 at the very least, just so it's a nice round even number? But this should honestly be like 40% or something. This is bad. Albedo's constellations are bad. I do not recommend using any of your free ones on him. He's not even a good character in general. Sorry, Albedo mains, but I'm sure you guys agree with me that even his constellations are not good. Next up is Tartaglia, or Child, whichever name you prefer. So let's go ahead and look at his constellations. So C1 makes it so you decrease the cooldown of his Foul Legacy Raging Tide by 20%. Now, there is a bit of a debate, right, with this constellation. Is it good? Is it bad? honest, like we've said before, you shouldn't like I've said before, you shouldn't be in his dual blades for too long because you will have a ridiculously long cooldown if you do. And besides, you need to redo his rotation of reapplying buffs and off-field damage, etc., etc. So you shouldn't be in it for too long anyways. Therefore, the cooldown reduction is unnecessary. But another way to think about it is that, hey, you could be in his Foul Legacy Raging Tide form for a bit longer without being as punished for it, which would be an overall damage increase. So whichever way you look at it, the constellation is basically just a quality of life and makes his skill more forgiving. This one makes it so that you gain energy every time an opponent is defeated with Riptide. This is only going to be good. You know those combat events where you have to kill waves and waves of enemies? Basically that. Outside of it, obviously for bosses, this is useless. C3, C5, you know, already know. It's going to be a good damage increase, obviously. C4, now this is where he gets interesting. This makes it so that the Riptides you apply, he applies a different Riptide because of this constellation that does not affect your regular Riptide, and it doesn't screw with like the interval. So he's basically doing a lot more Riptide damage, which is good. Again, this is going to help his group crowd DPS, and I guess his bot DPS as well, but this is more for like dealing with waves of enemies again, where you'll see like huge value of Riptide. C6 is Havoc Obliteration, and this makes it so when you use the melee version of it, that's like the, you know, when he does the Scythe Slash, this makes it so the CD of your skill is reset, and this can only take place once Tartaglia returns to his ranged stance. So basically what this is saying is that you can have a very long uptime with Tartaglia, where you can use like the full extent of his skill, then use his burst, and then it will reset the cooldown of his elemental skill, and then you can go again, or you know, reapply your buffs, debuffs, and then go again with very obviously very little downtime. So something to consider, but it is a C6. Now, do I think Tartaglia's constellations are good? Not really. I mean, if you want a character that's gonna do great in like not Spiral Abyss and like not Stygian Onslaught situations, like if you're using him for Imaginarium Theater in like the acts where you're not fighting a boss, this is great, and this is good for combat events, right, where you're just fighting waves of enemies, like I said before. But for boss DPS, not so much. Next up is Klee. Let's take a look at her constellations. So attacks and skills have a certain chance to summon sparks that bombard opponents, dealing damage equal to 120% of Sparks and Splash. Remember, Sparks and Splash, for those that need a refresher, that is her burst. So it does 120% of her burst damage. The problem with this constellation is that it says certain chance. We're RNG. We don't know what the chance is. So you could get a damage increase. You could not. We don't know. This is just okay at best because it's an RNG constellation. C2 is good though. This makes it so that her skill decreases opponent's defense by okay. What is it with Hoyoverse and their old constellations having the weirdest values? 23% instead of a nice even 20 or 25%. I don't know what the deal is, but yes, this is good. 23% defense shred, good. Skill increase is kind of, you know, we're gonna go ahead and skip the C4. So if Klee leaves the field during the duration of her burst, her departure triggers an explosion that deals 555% of her attack as AoE pyro damage. This is such a meme of a constellation because you don't want to leave during her burst. You don't want to leave during it. So what you want to do is leave at the very last second of her burst duration to do a final, you know, big explosion of damage. And again, weird scaling, 555% of her attack. It's not going to be a crazy amount or anything. This isn't a Malvika burst, you know, explosion. This is meh at best compared to newer characters these days. But again, she is an old character. I understand. C6 is while under the effect of her burst, she will regenerate 3 energy for not just her, but all members. Oh, sorry. She will become a battery for her team, not her. Excuse me. Every 3 seconds, and then when Sparks and Splash is used, all party members will gain a 10% pyro damage bonus for 25 seconds. 10%? That's so little. And that further, you know, tells you that she's meant to be used with an all pyro team. But 10% damage is very little for a C6. The energy is nice, so if you're using her with characters like Zhonling, for example, you know, she'll get her burst back even faster. But this isn't that good. Again, if you're looking for mid damage, sure. And if you just like Klee, go for it. But these constellations outside of C2 are just not that great. And with that being said, Klee was our final character. That's gonna do it for this long video. Again, the point of this video was not to tell you to constellation, you know, use your constellations on this and that and this character. Use them on whoever you want. I'm just sharing my 2 cents on which constellations I think are very good to consider, and which ones, you know, I wouldn't use on unless I really, really like the character. So again, ultimately, it is up to you to use them on how you see fit. Remember, you only have 4 of them per year. So it is a big choice and something you should definitely take some time to think about. But, you know, I might be just huffing copium at this point, but I do hope that Hoyoverse, you know, maybe this is a step in the right direction, and maybe Hoyoverse will eventually in the future be a little bit more generous with this in the future. Like maybe instead of 4 per year, it ends up being 8 per year, and maybe we can use up to 2 on the same character or something like that. Because if we were to just stick to this, the way it's designed, you know, if you want to C6 a character, I'll see you guys in 2031 or 2030 or whatever when you finally can C6 that character, assuming you're starting from C0. You know, it's going to be a very, very long time until any of us gets a C6. And even if we did get a C6, we saw, like, several of these characters, especially, like, the older ones, right, because of the older design. Even if they were C6, it's not like they're going to turn into the most broken OP character in the game all of a sudden. Like, no, like, even if you had a C6 Klee, guess what? Malvika's still doing way more damage than her. So it's not like, oh, power creep. No, like, if anything, this would just make Klee a decent option for, like, content where you're just fighting groups of enemies. And that's it, like... I don't know, maybe I'm underestimating how strong the C6 power is, but I don't think it's that strong. So, you know, I hope in the future, Hoyoverse is a little bit nicer, a little bit more lenient, a little bit more generous, but that... Hoping Hoyoverse is generous is a lot of copium huffing. And that is going to be it for me on this video. I hope it was helpful to someone out there. I understand this is a long one, that's because we had a lot to cover. But if you have your own, you know, 2 cents you want to share on some constellations, maybe I'm not understanding just how valuable some of these constellations are, which is totally fair because I don't have all of these characters. Like, I don't have Xiao, I don't have Klee, but maybe, you know, oh, like, you know, you don't understand, Panda, having that 3rd skill changes everything and you're undervaluing it, you know, maybe, all right, you know, maybe I am wrong, my bad. But feel free to leave a comment on as to why. I'd love to hear your opinions on that. Maybe, you know, I'm underestimating, you know, oh, that Ayato constellation you said was kind of meh is actually pretty good and stuff like that. I'd love to hear it. But don't forget to leave a like, subscribe to the channel. I'll be making more content like this in the future. But yeah, good luck to all of you in the next update, you know, depending on whoever you want to pull for. And good luck on deciding on who you want to give your constellations for. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.